Welcome to PowerUp podcast, the podcast that seeks to empower and dismantle, giving us the power and confidence to question, deconstruct, rebuild, and expand in life. I'm your host, Amma Rouge, voiceover and multidisciplinary artist, well-being advocate, food and book geek with over 14 years of movement-centered experience.
I am your host, Ella Mesmer, artist, choreographer, yogi and coach with a passion for alchemy, creativity, transformation and workplace wellness.
We recognise that we can't dismantle and empower or be empowered without first learning ourselves, diving deeper to unlearn the harmful, restrictive and unprogressive. It's an ongoing practice and journey for us all, which is why we created this podcast.
Our show features guests doing the work to enlighten, deconstruct and power up in their own magical ways.
We're going to be having conversations around the power of healing, transformation, well-being and creativity, and how they feed our personal and collective evolution, how they help us power up. In this episode, we talk about consent. We always aim to engage thoughtfully and with compassion. For anyone processing trauma around consent, we want to empower you to choose whether you listen to this episode or not. If you are affected by anything discussed in this episode, we have provided links to organisations you may find helpful in the show notes. So we're super happy to be sitting down to chat with Robyn Dalzen today. We're going to be bathing in her knowledge. We're super gas. Robyn is an ex-Mormon turned pleasure revolutionary. She's an international coach and facilitator and is passionate about helping people find what brings them joy, both in their body and in their life. Her work is at the intersection of mindfulness, consent, embodiment, and sexuality, guiding people to slow down and bring awareness to what they desire, practice the skills to communicate those desires, and create clear agreements to receive exactly what they want. Robyn is co-founder of the School of Consent with Dr. Betty Martin, creator of the Wheel of Consent. She is a certified transformational leadership coach, a certified Wheel of Consent facilitator, a certified tension and trauma releasing exercise provider, and a sexological bodyworker in training. She's also a collaborator and coach with Self-Service. If after today's show or at any point you want to learn about the Wheel of Consent from the comfort of your own home, you can do so by checking out upcoming courses on her website calendar, on her website, which you can find the link to in our show notes. So let's get into it.
So I work with a model called the Wheel of Consent, which was created by Dr. Betty Martin. And so before I describe the Wheel of Consent, it would be helpful to say a little bit about what is consent, because there are many definitions that are being used right now around consent. And oftentimes when people think about consent, they think about permission, that I'm consenting for someone to do something or for something to happen. And consent is actually much broader than that. Consent, the way that we're using it in this conversation of the Wheel of Consent, is that consent is about the agreement. And so it's an agreement between two or more people about what might happen or what will not happen. And the Wheel of Consent adds a few new dimensions to that. So the Wheel of Consent takes apart the aspects of giving and receiving. And so to talk about giving and receiving, I have to define what we mean by giving and receiving as well, because receiving can have many definitions. So we can receive, which means something is coming towards us. And that might be something we want or something we don't want. You know, I can receive a package in the mail and it might be a gift from my lover, or I might receive a tax bill, one I might want and one I certainly don't want. And so that definition of receiving is one definition. Another definition of receiving is about receiving a gift. So it's something that I want. And that can either come towards me, someone gives me a gift, like the package from my lover, or receiving can be something that I move toward. I move toward my lover and I receive the gift of their presence. So it's not about the action, but it's about the gift. And so that's the definition of receiving that we're talking about in this model of the wheel of consent. And when we take apart the receiving from who's actually doing the action, it creates a couple possibilities when it comes to interactions. And so the gift aspect is one dimension. And the second dimension is this question of who's taking the action, who's doing in this interaction. And so that could be there's something that I want, and I want someone else to take the action for my benefit. So I might want a hug, or I might want my partner to cook dinner. And so I make a request and I say, will you give me a hug? Or will you cook dinner tonight? I'm really tired. And so it's something that I want. The gift is for me. And and in this case, I'm asking someone else to do it for me.
Right.
So that's one dynamic of, of receiving and giving. There's a second dynamic in receiving and giving, and that's the dynamic where there's something that I want, and I want to have the freedom and the possibility to take action toward my desire. So that might be asking my partner, may I put my arms around you? May I hold you? Or it might be, I love to cook, and may I create my favorite meal for us to enjoy. And so it's about what I want, and I'm the one that's doing the action. And so this creates a second dynamic or a second possibility when it comes to giving and receiving. And so, how this fits within the wheel of consent, let me see if I can paint a picture for you of it. So, if you imagine a vertical line, and on one side of this, you're receiving, and on the other side of this, you're giving. So, that's one aspect that we're talking about. And then the second aspect is who's doing the action. So if you add a horizontal line across that, and we're talking like a first aid cross, not Jesus on the cross. So it's an equal cross here. And so on one side, you have who's doing, and on the other side, you have who's being done to. And so that those two crosses create four possibilities. And those are the four quadrants of the wheel of consent, which sounds very geeky.
We love
And
geeks.
so, yes.
We do love geeks.
So these four possibilities, I can be receiving on the receiving side, and I can be in the top half where I'm receiving and I'm doing. And diagonally across from that, the person who's giving the gift is giving and they're being done too. So that would be the example that I gave where there's something I want and I want to take the action, like the question of, may I put my arms around you? And so the person who's giving the gift is actually giving a gift of access. It's an access to their body, which is a real gift, and it can be a very vulnerable gift to give. And so that's one dynamic. The second dynamic, if you imagine the cross again, and I'm on the lower half, so I'm receiving, it's what I want, and I'm done too. So I'm asking someone to do something for my benefit. And diagonally across that, the person is giving me a gift and they're taking the action. So they're doing for me. They're in service towards my desires. So that would be that question of, will you cook me dinner? Or will you give me a hug? So they're taking the action and they're giving me the gift. And for both these aspects of receiving, it can feel really vulnerable to ask for what we want, to make a request.
Yeah.
And it's quite powerful when we're able to access that and to put our desires forward.
So excited to have you on the show, Robyn, and such a beautiful. I feel like I actually have my eyes closed and I could still see the wheel in front of me. So I hope readers are with us, just in case you want to stop and have a look at that image. We're also going to pop that link in the show notes, so do check that out. So now we've looked at receiving and giving in the context of the wheel. And I'd also just like to give a context that I've been training in the Wheel of Consent with the amazing Robyn, which is such a gift, such a pleasure. And the other thing that I think I've really learned from the training is understanding the importance of knowing what we want. So I wondered if you would like to share a bit about that.
Knowing what we want. Yeah, this is powerful. And I know in my own experience, I was never taught to pay attention to what I want. I was never taught that it was a spiritual thing to be putting my desires first. In fact, I was taught quite the opposite, that the way to be a good human is to put the needs of others first. And I imagine many
Mm-hmm.
people were taught that as well, regardless of where you come from, your cultural background, your religious background. What I've seen in teaching this work around the world is that it's part of the human experience, that it's not, we're not taught how to want. And it actually took me going through a cancer diagnosis to really slow down and pay attention to myself, to my body, to what I wanted and needed, actually, in this place of total vulnerability. And it was through that process that
Mm-hmm.
I actually, I talk about being a pleasure revolutionary. And it was actually through a process of learning, what is it that brings me joy? What is it that brings me pleasure? And I'm speaking about pleasure in the broadest sense of the word of, what is it that lights me up, that makes me feel alive, that makes me happy,
Come
that makes me
on.
feel connected. And it really, I had to go on this journey to discover what that was. And so, we talk about, and particularly when it comes to consent, we talk about being able to speak up for what we want, and the importance of that, in creating an agreement with another. But even that process of knowing what we want is a process, and it requires us to slow down. It requires us to tune into our bodies. And for many people, um, this is this is not something that's familiar to us. So even being present with sensation, being present with emotion, can feel intimidating, can feel scary, can feel vulnerable, can feel risky.
Mm.
And so there, it's not, it sounds simple to say, if there's something you want, ask for it. And it's not always that easy. And so a lot of the work that I do around teaching consent and creating these consensual agreements, is really about slowing down the whole process to notice within ourselves, what am I feeling right now? What am I needing right now? What would serve me? What would make me feel good? Um, and then first finding what it is, and then having the courage to actually speak it and to ask for it. And then on the other side of that, consent is a dynamic. And so I'm going through that process of finding what I want and asking for it. And on the other side, with this person that I'm making this request of, there's also a process that happens within them. And it's a slowing down and noticing, is this something that I'm willing to give? Is it something I'm willing to participate in? And do I have enough information to find a clear yes or no? And if I don't, can I ask more questions? Do I feel safe enough to engage in that conversation and to get the information that I need to find my yes or my no? And then to be able to speak up and feel confident that if it's a no, that no will be well received and respected. And if it's a yes, to have confidence in my yes, that at any point, if it changes to a no, that I can say pause or stop, or that's as much as I can give. So, so when we talk about consent and this conversation, it's ongoing in both, or however many parties are involved. It's a process of constantly checking in with ourselves and staying current with what's happening in our body, and being able to communicate that in an ongoing way to keep that engagement consensual.
I have a question. My question is, I'm wondering about whether you feel able to use this model with people who haven't done the same work, and how you navigate that, or if you navigate that.
Good question.
Yeah. So the model is interesting. The model is not necessary for consent to happen. And this model it's putting words to dynamics that are happening all around us all the time. And so whether we're conscious of it or not, this model of the wheel of consent is playing out all around us. And so I think that's one of the things that when I learned it, it was so enlightening, because suddenly I had words to describe what I was experiencing in different engagements. And there's a whole aspect to this that we haven't even talked about that and that yet, and that's, what happens outside of the agreement when, when I ask for something and the other person says yes, we have an agreement, and that creates consent. So completing this diagram of the two crosses is this circle that goes around it, which is consent. It's the agreement. And so outside of that, there are things happening as well when we don't have a clear agreement, and I maybe don't ask for what I want, and I just start doing, or I'm taking what I want without consent. It puts us outside of these four quadrants. Or when I start doing something for someone else because I think it's good for them or it's something they want, but they haven't really asked for it. We're outside of this container of the four quadrants as well. And so these dynamics are happening, and this model gives language to it, which can be very helpful. And so if I'm engaging with someone who's not familiar with this model, it still comes down to, if something's happening, I ask myself a question: who is this for? And the way to determine who it's for is based on the agreement that we came to. And if I think, something's happening, and if I walk into a room and I see two people engaging, maybe I walk in and I see, one person giving another person a massage. I can see who's doing the action, but I have no idea who it's for. because I haven't been privy to the conversation and the agreement that was made about it. And if I were to ask these two people, who is this for? Depending on the level of conversation they had before, they may have no idea who it's for. So it might be that one person who's massaging is thinking, oh, my partner looks like they're tired and I'm going to just give them a massage and do something good for them. So they might be thinking they're giving this gift. But if there was no conversation and this other person comes up, someone comes up behind them and is massaging their shoulders, and they're thinking, is this for me or is this for them? Do they want to just connect with me and be close? Um, and and so even when people are interacting and there's a dynamic happening, the two people don't always know who's actually giving the gift and who's receiving the gift. And so what I've become more clear about when I'm engaging with someone is having the conversation before taking any action and noticing where it feels uncomfortable to make a request. So if I want to feel connected to a friend and I don't really know what that looks like or how to ask for it, I might hint at something that I want, or hey, maybe we could go for a walk. Instead of saying, hey, I'd really like to connect with you. Would you like to go for a walk with me? It makes it clear that there's something that I want, and I'm asking, hey, would you like this? And so we can start, without even understanding this model, we can start to notice, is there something that I want? And if there is, the thing that has the most integrity is to make a request and ask for it. And to notice, there's something I want. Is it something that I want to do for myself? Do I want to ask someone for permission to do what I want? Or is there something I want someone else to do for me? And so that's the first thing of just living this, noticing, what do I want? How do I want it to look? And what kinds of questions do I need to ask? Or what kinds of requests do I need to make in order to get it? On the other side of that, so that's on the receiving side. And this is where we have the least amount of comfort and practice, is being on the receiving side. Most of us are familiar with being on the side of giving, and typically giving our action to others.
Yeah.
And so, if we notice that there's a need, we can make an offer. Is there something that you want? Is there something that would feel good to you? Is there anything I can do for you? So we can make these offers and see if the other person picks it up. Yeah, I would love that. Can you give me a ride? Can you, pick up my daughter from daycare? So there are ways that we can make those offers in our everyday life, and notice that we're giving that gift.
Just to kind of respond to that a little bit, I can just imagine that a lot of our
Yeah.
listeners are sitting there like frantically nodding their heads at so much you said, and recalling incidents and moments where they've been on one side or the other, either on the receiving side, or the giving side. And imagine there's so much, I know in my mind right now, there's so much recall happening of moments, even recent moments where I'm like, oh my goodness, that was where I needed to and wanted to ask for what I needed, but felt uncomfortable to do so, and that distinction you gave between the kind of tentative asking, i.e., oh, let's go for a walk, let's go for a walk. Or are you free to go for a walk on such and such day at such and such time? Or I'd really love to connect with you. Are you free to go for a walk at such and such? there's a complete difference in that distinction, and it communicates something completely different. And so, yeah, for me, there's just so many and so many head nod moments, and I can imagine for our listeners, it's probably very, very similar. But yeah, please do continue.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a particular dynamic here. My friend Marcia Baczynski calls it desire smuggling, where where we maybe don't feel confident asking for what we want, and so instead we offer to give something to someone else in the hopes that we'll
Mm.
get something back. Or maybe we give the thing that we want, thinking the other person will reciprocate, and then we can get it. But we've done the good thing by giving it first. And we're hoping and praying that we then get something for ourselves. And so we have all kinds of strategies to try and get our needs met by avoiding being straightforward and clear and actually saying, hey, there's something that I want.
Yeah,
Can I have this?
yeah,
And there's a self permission that's necessary before we even get to asking someone else to give us this gift. It's, can we allow ourselves to receive this gift?
Yes. It's interesting as well how this connects to other podcast talks, how this connects to the Enneagram and the helper, that kind of characteristic of thinking that to get what you want, you have to be helpful first, and how then, we can get into these cycles of beliefs about, how we have to be as a human, and even kind of connecting to what you said about learning what it is to be a good person, and how it's almost like we have to do this unlearning of the social norms to actually, first of all, to admit what we want, and then, the next layer of asking for it.
Yeah, I feel like I spent the first half of my life learning all of these strategies of how to be in the world, and I've spent the second half unlearning all of it.
I think I'm following your direction. Yeah.
And it's so powerful actually to even just hear somebody say it out loud. To say actually you are allowed to ask for what you want. It's okay. It's actually allowed. And it
Mhm.
is very much the opposite of what a lot of people grow up with, as you said. So even that statement in itself, I think, is probably going to open a lot of doors that have been solidly shut, padlocked, bolted, and are, rusty at the moment for a lot of people.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, and it's not only allowed, it's necessary.
Mm,
So until we learn how to receive and how to fill ourselves up, we cannot give with integrity,
true.
because we're always going to be trying to sneak something in for
Mm,
ourselves.
yeah. Yeah. Absolute truth.
Yeah. There was this moment after the first training that I did with you where I was working with my dancers, and I'd asked them if they would go one more time, and they said yes, but I just knew in my heart that it was no. In their bodies, they were, and dancers, we're very much trained to kind of like be this empty slate, and you just there and you just do what the choreographer says, and there I was in the position of the choreographer asking them to do it one more time, and linking back to, I'd just done the training the week before, and I was like, actually I can't move forwards. I just couldn't, because I was like, I know this is no, even though the no hasn't been said. I can sense it, and I can sense that I'm going into the taking quadrant, and I'm going into that place of, I just didn't feel comfortable with it. So I think it's yeah, there's so many layers. There's so many layers to this work, and once you
Mhm.
begin, we can see how we are kind of leaking into into the places that we don't want to be, actually, as as a human being. I think. Um, hmm.
Mm. Yeah, well, and there's an aspect of power in that example that also plays
Mm,
out and impacts our capacity to access our yes or our no. And, in that example, I imagine as the choreographer, you have a certain amount of
yeah.
power over the dancers. And you're there to instruct and direct, and they're following your
Mm-hmm.
lead. And, I've had similar examples in spaces where I'm teaching, and I hold a certain power as the facilitator in the group. And, I'm inviting people to step into experiences and to try things on. And I try to set up a container that offers a lot of choice for people to decide how they want to participate in any given moment. And and still, there's this dynamic where if I'm inviting someone into an experience to try on, an exercise in asking for what they want or making requests, there still is this innate part of us that has a tendency to go along
Mm,
with what someone is offering,
Hmm.
when there is this power dynamic.
Yeah.
And and so and it goes, if we roll back in time, it goes all the way back to our infancy and having our caretakers doing things for us and to us.
Mm.
And, in the best of cases, it's for our well-being, and in fact it's necessary for our survival. And so we learn that stuff happens to us, touch happens to us, and we learn to go along with it. And we learn that what's happening or what we're being told is more important than how we feel about it.
Yeah.
And this gets
yeah.
perpetuated throughout our childhood, through our educational system, through our cultural constructs in society. Um, this happens in, systemic power dynamics and oppression. And so these ideas are not just ingrained in our mind, but are ingrained in our body,
Mm,
Mm.
that we have to just go along with what's happening because it's either safer, or we don't have a choice, or we don't believe we have a choice. We don't have the words to speak up. And so part of this conversation around consent is starting to understand what's happening within our body, um, and this response that we have to go along with what someone else is telling us, or even when we get into, if we say yes to something and then we change our mind, it's hard to muster up the courage to say, actually, I'm that's enough, stop, I'm done, no more. And it's easier to just go along and think, okay, this will be over soon, or, I can just suffer through.
Yeah.
So it's natural. It's I don't know that it's natural. It's normalized and ingrained in our
yeah,
experience.
sadly, and I know, like, we here are all nodding because we've all been there, we've all had those experiences, and just reaching out to the listeners if this is resonating, and um, we're hopefully bringing you some insight that might help. And this is why I went to the Wheel of Consent, because I wanted to find ways that I wasn't in those situations anymore, and I did feel empowered. So we hope, and we're reaching out to you, and we hope that this is helpful.
Listeners, we have reached the end of part 1 of The Art of Receiving and Giving. Robyn, Ella, and myself will be back next week to continue the conversation. Until then, stay well, be kind, we love you.
Thank you for listening. You can connect to us and our guests via the links in each episode's show notes. Before you go, we invite you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the goodness to come. And if you enjoyed today, perhaps tell a friend to tell a friend. We are always grateful for you, our listeners, for our fabulous guests, and to everyone who has contributed to and been a part of our journey here.
Our music is by Tomo Carter. Everything else is brought to you by us, the PowerUp Power Team.
I'm Ella Mesmer.
I am Amma Rouge. And we are PowerUp Podcast.